this is Brett with Spark Up Dance, and today we're giving you a quick introduction to turns. So I'm going to start off by saying that there are 5 primary types of turns that I've come across throughout my entire dance career that are primarily used in all partner dances. Now, also note that there are variations of these, but I'm just going to be showing the most common types of how they're practiced. But do note that there are variations of each and every single style of these turns. So we have turn type number 1, which is spot turns. These are turns that are primarily done on one foot that tend to rotate in place. Type 2 is going to be doing chaine turns. Chaine turns are tight, quick, generally quick traveling turns. All right, so those are chaine turns. And then we have paddle turns. A lot of times they're also called forward walk turns or solo spot turns, depending on where you're learning it from. But generally speaking, I call them paddle turns. The reason I call them paddle turns is because it's almost like you have a paddle and that you're using the paddle to help turn yourself around. That's the idea. So the way paddle turns work is usually what I'll do is I'll cross my foot. I'll go ahead and cross the foot in front to where I'm stepping in a line. And then I'm going to squeeze my thighs. So I swivel on both of my feet, or I'll transfer to one foot and then go. And then I'll come back where I came from. So generally I'll have one foot that stays in place, one foot's in place, turn, turn. If I'm just doing a bunch of them, turn. I can do them going any direction. Sometimes paddle turns, you'll turn and you'll fully commit weight, and that's all you'll do. In other dances, I'll hardly transfer the weight at all. And then in dances like, let's say, rumba, I'll fully transfer, and then a lot of times I'll come back and transfer again. So paddle turns, essentially anytime my foot stays still, and I paddle around using both feet to swivel, to rotate. I'll do that from this angle as well. So we're here, we rotate, we come back just to show again, rotate, and then come back. So those are paddle turns. The next type of turn that we have are called pivot turns. Pivot turns are any time that I have what's called a thigh lock. A thigh lock is essentially where my upper thighs, my very high upper area of my thighs, are locked together. And my feet will generally be out. This is generally a traveling type of turn. And both of my, at least one of my feet will be sticking out at all times as I'm coming through. Yeah, I do that going this way. And I'll do that once towards the camera. All right, so those are pivot turns. And then the last type of turn that we have is going to be just a general walking turn. So a walking turn is essentially just this. I walk as I turn. Pretty simple. So just to review, we have spot turns that turn in place, chaine turns, which are very tight and quick traveling turns. We have paddle turns, which also generally move away, but for the most part, end up staying in place. And then we also have pivot turns, which is another type of generally traveling turn as well. And then walk around turns, which obviously travel as you walk. All right, so those are our main types of turns. Now, a couple things I want to talk about just to give you guys some tips and ideas about turns and things you can do in different circumstances, even before you start learning proper turn technique, which is linear versus rotational momentum. So linear versus rotational momentum is simply talking about the act that if I'm going straight forward, this is a very linear type of movement. But if I rotate, this is a very rotational type of movement where my energy goes around instead of forward. Now, I can have linear momentum and then add rotational and then just go back to linear. Yeah. I can also have rotational momentum and then add linear, just as a brief example. That's without any specific type of turns or anything. That's just walking. So do note that there's a big difference in them. When I'm doing something like a pivot turn, I'll usually go linear and then rotational. But if I do something like a spot turn, there's no linear whatsoever. It's all rotational. So think about that whenever you're doing a turn, is how much linear momentum do I need for this and how much rotational momentum do I need in order to do this. And in my walkthroughs, I do break that down and I let you know what order they're in. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is about dizziness. So one of the biggest questions or things that people wonder, at least subconsciously, as they first begin to dance, unless they have some type of experience in life that has trained them otherwise, how do you prevent getting dizzy? Now, a lot of people out there have said spotting. If I spot, which is essentially the act of my eyes looking at one particular spot as I'm rotating, I will not get dizzy. That, I'm going to say, is a myth. I think spotting helps you concentrate on where you're going, and check out my spotting video for more details on that. But it doesn't actually stop the fact that there are chemicals in your head that are swirling and your body's trying to adjust to it. So honestly, the best way to get good at not getting dizzy is, funny enough, to get dizzy. So I recommend doing this in a place where you have a mat. You can also do this like in a pool, or maybe if you're near a beach and there's soft sand around. What I would recommend essentially is to spin without any spotting, stop, maybe sit down if you need to, that's fine, and then do that about 3 times, so 3 reps, like we're working out, I love it. And then take a break for probably a good half of the day, and then do it again. And do this for as long as you need to. Champion level dancers spin so frequently and so often that they just naturally tend to develop immunity to being dizzy, because essentially you're trying to train your brain to compensate for the fact that all those chemicals in your head are swirling around. And it needs time to do that. So I recommend practicing it twice a day if you can. And then usually most students say they start seeing results within a month. So practice that, and I promise you, you'll be able to do more turns without worrying about as much dizziness. Okay, so then another thing is that whenever I talk about a turn, sometimes I'll say do a left turn, do a right turn. Well, which way is left when we're turning and which way is right? So essentially it's really easy to think about. If I think about my left shoulder here going backwards, then this is a left turn. So if my left shoulder goes back, that's a left turn. If my right shoulder goes back, that's a right turn. I'm sure you kind of figured that out. So if you're worried about being dyslexic or anything of those natures, one thing you can do is to put like a little L here on your left shoulder, a little R here, and then just bring that shoulder back and be like, that's left, that's right. And that can help a lot. So that's for left and right turns. So the other thing that happens a lot of times that people are always worried about, regardless if they get dizzy or not, is what do I do about being balanced as I turn? Now, as you get better with your turn technique, that's going to go away on its own. But in the meantime, while you're still figuring everything out, and even if there's just too much momentum, this can happen to champions too. It's just less frequently. What happens if I get pushed off balance somehow? What do I do? Well, the first thing that you can do on your own, okay, let's say you're rotating and then you get off balance, is to spread your feet wide. So I'm going to show that from this angle, and then spread my feet wide. You want to have as wide a base as possible. Think of like a trophy. If the trophy has a really big base, you could just set it anywhere and it's no problem. But if you got a big fancy trophy and it's got a tiny little base, you're going to set it down and then hope that it's not going to fall over. So you want that wide base. As soon as you rotate, as soon as you feel off balance, wide feet. The other thing that you can do is relax when you fall. So, first off, whenever you're falling in general, a lot of people tend to tense up. So they go to fall down, they tense up, and then that's usually how they hurt something a lot of times. So unless you're pushing yourself away from like a sharp rock or obstacle, I generally recommend, and they teach this a lot in Aikido classes, is to relax as you fall down so that your muscles and tissue will essentially work as, I'm all powdery now, as cushion as you go down. So one way you can practice this very easy is if you have a bed or a really fluffy couch, is to just kind of fall back into the couch and see, or the bed, and see if you can keep yourself relaxed as you're in mid-fall. This can help a ton when it comes to preventing injuries if you end up falling down. Now, of course, since we're talking about partner dancing, the other thing you could do is use your partner. Now, let me be strict about this first. If you've hooked somebody into your grasp and you're falling down and you pull on them, they will very likely go down with you. If they do, once again, you want to go back to relaxing and seeing if you guys can roll through it. But more importantly, let's say that your partner is not off balance, but you are for whatever reason. Let's say you get a crack inside the dance floor and, oh no, I'm falling. The worst thing you could do is to pull. If you think about walking down a flight of stairs and there's the little bar that you can hold on to as you go down, if I fall down the stairs and I pull on this, yes, it'll save me, but it'll also throw me into the wall it's attached to and probably slam my face against it. And I'll still technically fall down on my rear and have to like try to awkwardly get up. But now let's say that you start falling and against that same rail, but instead you push into it instead of pulling into it. Well, if you lean into something, you're much more likely to keep your balance and not swing around or bring the person that you're with, in this case, with you. If you push on somebody, usually people will push back, and then that's not going to be a problem for them to keep you balanced. So if I'm here and I'm dancing and then I accidentally trip and my partner is right here with me, okay, I can press into them and they'll likely push back and we'll both be okay. But if I start falling and I grab my partner and pull, then they're more likely to come down and follow through with me than had I pushed on them. So whenever you start falling in the middle of a dance and your partner is there with you, you can push onto your partner. Don't ever, ever, ever pull, because you're just going to bring them down with you if you do. Most likely, unless they're a trained professional. Okay, so then the last thing I want to talk about is pulsing actions and fizzle turns. Fizzle turns is a turn I made up, by the way. I'm going to break that down in a minute, though. First off, we're going to talk about pulsing. So what is pulsing? Pulsing is essentially the act of whenever you turn, when am I powering my turn? Because most turns, we don't just power all the way through. I usually will swing into my turn and then allow the energy to do its thing. So I push into the turn, and then I let it fizzle out. And if I want to do multiple turns, I'll push, 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 push. I won't try to push the whole time. That's me pulsing by myself. I could do this rotating too. Pulse, 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 just to give an example. Okay. Now, when I'm with a partner, my partner, if I'm a leader, I'm usually leading the pulse. If I'm a follower, I'm generally helping to create the pulse within my own body, so I'm listening to their pulse. But essentially what that is that I lead and follow through, lead and follow through, lead and follow through. Now, I have a leader's guide that breaks all of that down and how you can do it more efficiently. And followers, I have a guide on how to keep your frame as you're turning to make sure that when the pulse happens, your body is following through it, not just your arm by itself. So I recommend checking that out when you get a chance. But long story short, pulsing is really important because it's how turns are powered, and the rhythm that they're being done to. So musically, they're really important. Ba da 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 da. You can count what's happening in the music, or just stay on beat as you rotate. So that's pulsing. And then fizzle turns. Fizzle turns is where I pretty much create power at the very beginning of the turn, and then slowly the turn just fizzles out, quite literally. I like to do this when I fizzle turn. But essentially, fizzle turn is where I do one pulsing action to carry me through multiple turns. So an example would be that. I've done 2 turns that I powered with 1 versus turn, 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 where I'm constantly repowering the turn. That would be pulsing. But if I only do it once and then rotate multiple times, then I call that a fizzle turn, because eventually your energy fizzles out. There's nothing wrong with these types of turns. It's just a different, they're looking for a different type of result than doing a pulsing turn. Pulsing turns, you can go forever. Fizzle turns, you can power for a while, but they will always eventually die out unless you pulse again. So just know that those are 2 different types of things that are going to be happening. Fizzle turns are not led hardly. Usually you have to do those independently. And pulsing turns are something you do with your partner pretty much throughout the entire dance for the most part. All right, guys, so that's all my tips for giving you an introduction to turns. I look forward to seeing you guys next time.